So my name's Dr. Corrie. I'm an associate professor at the University of Cumbria and a professor of transformative learning at the University of Sunderland. So what I'm going to share with you today is probably my last 8 to 10 years worth of my own personal journey on understanding leadership development, an OD, and of course cultural change and personal change. And of course, as you will know as OD practitioners, all of these things are interrelated and interconnected. You kind of can't really change one without changing the other. Can everybody hear me okay? Just checking. Yeah. I do have a PowerPoint which I want to share some of the things with you because it gives you the background as to the why. But I want to keep coming out of the PowerPoint so we can have a bit of a discussion, if that's okay, at various points. So I'm kind of going to explain the why. Why did I start thinking about this in the first place? And then I'm going to explain the research, because that was the how and with whom. And then it's the what. What did I actually develop that was different, and how do I know it was different? Through the research and also through the current delivery at the moment that we're working with the various people. And then I've got some evaluation from my students, actual direct evaluation of their story, of the impact on themselves, and then the what next. Okay, so I'm just going to try and share this PowerPoint if it'll work. Just bear with me. Nothing worse than Teams on a good day. Come on. No, yeah, I don't want to update. No, thank you. Yeah. Okay, as I probably won't be able to see this, can somebody tell me if you can see that full screen?
Yeah, I can see that.
We've got it.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. Thank you. Okay, so thinking about leadership differently, the background to this was observing specific in NHS trusts, the continual delivery of a certain type of leadership development and the continual issues that seem to be being reported in the press. And of course, you know, just going back over the last 9-10 years, it started with the Francis Inquiry, the various other reviews, and of course the most recent one is the Messenger review. And it's no surprise, I don't know if people knew this, but there's been 68 public inquiries actively established between 1990 and 2017. So the background was telling me that something was not working in terms of what was being delivered or how it was being delivered, and that was the starting point. And I actually started to work with a trust, and I started to deliver some leadership delivery that they insisted on having, and it kind of was interesting, which I'm going to share with you in a minute. So when I actually started to develop the theoretical practice around this, and which I'm going to share with you in a minute, I actually sat down with the military, with Defence Medical Headquarters, who are based in Lichfield. They supply medics, nurses, doctors, AHPs, right across the board to both the NHS joint hospitals and also for themselves. And I sat with the brigadier there, and one day we had this conversation looking at that big list of issues. Why is it so difficult to do this within the NHS? What is it that's been happening? So I'd been lucky enough to start to develop that with Sellafield, with the nuclear sector. So I'd had the opportunity to look at that. I had a previous opportunity to look at it with the NHS in Cumbria. I then got invited to the École de Guerre, which is the French war school in Paris, to look at how they do things, and then got involved with Defence Medical Services, both through 2nd Medical Brigade, which is the local brigade, but also Defence Medical Services, which is all 3 groups. And I got the opportunity to start to look at how we can do this differently. So the work I did with Sellafield, we put probably between 12 and 1,400 students through a program, which I'm going to share some of it with you in a minute, which is a little bit different to your normal leadership program, because it's got no leadership theory in it at all, anywhere, in any point, any way, shape or form. And it's very much all about them and helping them understand who they are, and from that follows their behaviours. So from Sellafield, we then took what I had seen and we delivered it to Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt Orthopaedic Hospital, and we also delivered it to Forth Valley Board in Scotland, from which came evaluation and 2 publications which were peer reviewed and publish. That's where the research came in. So the mid-staff's inquiry, I looked at transformative learning theory. This is where it comes from, Mesereau's theory of how adults learn. So this is more about how we learn and how we learn our learned behaviours. I then developed this disruptive pedagogical approach to leadership because it's not the what, it's the how we deliver it. The context is there, and also through coaching and mentoring. The output was the development and publication of theory and peer review. And then at the moment, we were commissioned 2.5 years ago to implement the Serve to Lead Defence Medical Leadership Programme with Defence. So we've delivered across Defence for the past 1.5 years, and we've just been recommissioned to continue that work. And we've also been asked to look at that also with the Cabinet Office and also with Shrivenham, which is the Defence Leadership Academy. So this is where all my thinking started, this crazy looking diagram here, which was how I tried to understand what it was that I was observing when I was actually teaching traditional styles of leadership, and why it wasn't working and why it didn't seem, to me, this is my view, to have the impact. And of course that was supported through the continual investigations that kept happening despite things kind of trying to be put straight. So what I looked at is the outer ring is what a person or a mid-career professional student, as we call them, comes with. So they come with prior knowledge, values and beliefs, experience, assumptions. They integrate with others and self, and the learning dynamic. So the learning dynamic is about how they've been previously taught in the past and what they expect to see, and their worldview. The middle ring is what we achieve with them when we're actually working with them. We look at personality traits, very much about reflection and reflexive practice. We look at the values and beliefs. We look at transformative action learning, coaching, perspective positioning, psychological perspectives, and critical self-reflection. And we try to get them to suspend their beliefs while we work with them during this period. And in the centre, what we're interested in is looking at how we can shift their meaning schemes, their schemas, their frames of reference from wherever they were, whatever that means, to wherever they need to be. And obviously that's culturally dependent on where they're working at. And we're trying to achieve what we call perspective transformation. So when they understand what their behaviours look like to others and how they may impact on others. So the key is creating the learning environment. This is the how. And that discourse can occur if you create the right learning environment. And this can be quite difficult to do, but this is where we almost take ourselves out of the room, because the experts in the room are them, because they are the experts on themselves. Now, our theoretical frameworks that we've developed and our positionality in terms of theory, practice and delivery gives us the credibility and authenticity. All about gaining the facilitators' trust with them and trusting the participants to do the work, because they can. And they know what to do, they just need the support. Intervenes for issues of misinformation and psychological safety, so very much about, we make sure it's a safe place. And we maintain what we call a brave space. So this is creating the space where they can actually understand and take time to be who they need to be. So the PhD research, I'll share this a little bit because it is a little bit crazy. This I particularly looked at epistemic knowledge, and what we mean is them being able to understand what they don't know about themselves. And these were all the theoretical frameworks that underpinned how we think and how we learn to learn effectively. And of course, if you've got something that's a repeated pattern of behaviour, then I looked at it from the perspective of, well, they're not learning to learn, how to learn properly, because they are set up for learning in a traditional way. And that looked like, in the past, lots of PowerPoint presentations. If there's not enough PowerPoint presentations in it, it's not good learning, and lots of information. And it's not about that, because you actually don't necessarily learn a lot from that. You get information download, which is a little bit different from the learning. And it starts very simply with values. What's important to you and your organisation, what your organisational values, what your team values, what your personal values, what your professional values. Then we investigate what the beliefs that underpin these values. Why do we hold them values? That's the key part. And where does that come from? And then the bit we're interested in is your leadership behaviours, how you act and your attitudes towards others. Because what you've got here is a perception. So you've got a perception of self and you've got a perspective on self. And of course, the actions are what people see in the workplace. They don't see the values and beliefs that underpin them, but they can visually see the actions. So when you hear about these teams in the workplace, it's the actions that get reported. It's the behaviours that get reported. It's not what sits underneath it. So I kind of took that part of it, and I'm working with a lady called Victoria Marsick at Columbia University at the moment, who's been a great inspiration to me, actually. And when I developed this model, I looked also then about the perspective of what other people might look like on you. So what are the leadership behaviours that other people see in you? Because that's the important part. And importantly, and she pointed this out to me, how do these affect your teams and what's the impact on your peers? So actually what you've got now is your perception versus your reality, and you've got your perspective on yourself versus the perspective of others. Because what you're interested in seeing is how other people may see you. Right, I'm just going to stop for a second and stop sharing, and then just see if anybody would like to start a conversation around where we are up to, because the next bit is me explaining my transformative learning theory. Would anybody like to ask any questions so far? Is it all blindingly obvious? Joanne, hello.
Hi, thanks, Ian. I sort of think it is obvious to some,
Yes,
but very much not obvious to others. And I think that sort of very much that sort of ways of learning and ways of putting theory into practice. I'm a local facilitator for the Mary Seacole programme that we deliver, and there's some of this self-reflection in there and that sort of behaviours, but I think also a little bit of self-regulation and ultimately, like you say, transforming self is really an interesting way to discuss. It's just like giving people the knowledge doesn't then equate to them doing it. No, very interesting. Great so far.
They have the knowledge already. The influence is the organisation, the team, where they are in their professional journey. And Fiona Chatton's work on professional identity is really important because that's a big part of what comes into this. And Fiona and I have discussed this. And it's you know, giving them the skill set to understand how to do it. It's the how bit. Because a lot of these leadership theories, what we found was that people were trying to fit themselves into these constructs. And then these constructs, it wasn't doing them any good because they weren't being authentic in terms of self. They were trying to fit themselves in. I've read it, I've got to fit myself into it. And of course, that's not how it works, because at the end of the day, everybody's, you know, whoever they are. Yeah. So if you take all that away and you simplify it down to values, what are the values? What's the beliefs? And what's the underpinning behaviours that you demonstrate as a result of that?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks.
Karen. Hi, Karen.
Hello, I'm just distracted by the fact I look like I've got no arms. I have actually got arms. They're just like, that's like a good magic trick.
Just lay the jumper over your front of you, you know, just keep him warm.
Good. Yeah, and I just thought, just in case it's not fully connecting with people yet, and I know we'll sort of come on to all this stuff, but you know, how we started to have this conversation was, you know, around the fact that, you know, Click, for example, obviously we offer you know, we do offer chalk and talk type stuff. We like to think we do it really well, but we're still doing the traditional method, I suppose, if you like, of, you know, offering up best practice, doing some exercises around that and expecting that people will go and put that into action. And so, you know, not just with leadership, but with quality improvement in particular, which is obviously massive for us in health and care. So, and saying, well, why is it that people can't just pick this learning up and go away and do it? What's, you know, what's stopping us? So, you know, that's kind of what brought us to this, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's where we started off. And then I shared with Karen some of my student, hi Fiona, some of my student stories from the Defence Medical Leadership Programme and said, let the students tell their story of their own transformation, because that's the important part. It's not me rabbiting on about it. It's let the students say how they've shifted and changed from where they were to where they are now. Fiona, the most important part about professional identity, absolutely.
I wouldn't even dare. Thanks for the shout out though. It's really interesting, Ian. I mean, how do you see, I'm just sort of thinking about the sort of the facilitation and the learning of this, or the spreading of the knowledge as such. So you think about, you know, this is obviously quite a different approach to leadership transformation that we've had before. How do you see that being impacted by people's ability to sort of almost facilitate that learning, if that makes sense? If you think about, you know, train the trainer model, or, you know, or the spreading of learning. And I guess almost linked to that is I'd be interested to see what you found from your previous courses, but like the kind of the peer support, so the kind of being in that safe environment where you share your own kind of reflection on your own leadership learning, and the impact that that then has on other people within as a peer group, as opposed to I am the teacher, I teach you because I know and I'm telling you what to do. Yeah, I don't know if what your comments are on that, really.
Yeah, I'm going to come on to some of that a little bit later on, but it's a really good point, because that's the sharing of how we do it is the key part, and that's the bit that I'm currently researching with 2 people in America, 2 PhDs in America, and we've developed a new model for that. Myself and Sean McCann. So I'm working with a guy called Sean McCann. He's the L&D lead for Ernst & Young. You've probably heard of them. And him and I are working together on looking at how, well, we're actually writing a book on this next year. We've started it, you know, we've got it fleshed out, and I'm going to show you the model at the end of the conclusion we came to. The how part is the most difficult part, creating that environment, because one of the things that happens is when the students come in, they expect what they've always got, which is a construct. So the construct is that we get lots of PowerPoints, there's lots of leadership theory in it, and you're going to sit and tell us what we need to know. And it doesn't work like that. So it can be a bit scary. So on the very first day, on the very first morning, we send them out a reflective workbook, and we ask them 5 reflective questions about what they want to seek from the program in terms of self, organization, team, etc. And then in the morning we do a share, and we do a very small share where we start the vulnerability, if you will, Fiona, the small vulnerability in doing the share. And because they're not used to it, they sit there, and I had the most challenge I've ever had. It was fascinating to see on the very first defence one last year, and so they're doing that. So they're in the transformative action learning set. So there's 4 groups of them. I did the first table, and it's a little share. You know, I want to achieve this, whatever it might be. It's kind of irrelevant what the share is. And then went to the second table, and this lady stood up and put hands on her hips. She was a squadron leader in the RAF, and she went, "What's transformative about you stood at the front with a felt tip pen and a PowerPoint slide up on a board?" And then sat down, and you could hear a pin drop in the room. And then a mate stood up next to it, put her hands on her hips, Kat, and went, "Yeah, and while I'm at it, I'm going to have a go as well." And she had a go. So I had to pick that up. So I picked it up, and I said, "Thank you for your observations. With the transformative learning, there are many ways we can start this. I didn't want to start it at the shock and awe end, which is where they end up on the 3rd day, and you'll see why in a minute. I wanted to start it nice and gently, but thank you for your share." Now, what I now know is happening is that I don't know if anybody familiar with neurosequencing. Anybody familiar with that at all? No. So there are four levels to go through before you can reach the neocortex in terms of learning. And actually what you're doing with the share is you're talking to the brainstem effectively, so you're calming it down. So you're preparing the learner for learning. And this is a piece of research I'm doing with a lady from San Jose University at the moment, is to look at how we measure this, because we've developed a measure as well to show the impact of this, which is how we're able to produce the data and the statistics for what we've got so far. But creating that environment can create fear in people, because they expect to see things in a certain way, and it's the skill of the facilitator, which is why it takes time. And what we're doing at the moment is we're looking for defence sustainable model, which is where we're going to support probably next year or the year after train the trainer, and support some of the first people that have gone through that become faculty effectively to actually support. We will always keep control of the first module because you have to for sensitivity, but the second and third they'll be able to do it themselves.
Fascinating. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you. So talking about the transformative learning as we were, here's the next slide. Share. You know you want to. Can you see that, everybody? Yeah. Yeah,
we've got it.
You got it. Okay, so going back to that model I had before, that the resulting point of view, this is from Mesereau's work. I made a boo-boo by trying to explain this to Forth Valley and also to Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt in my excitement of sharing the really quite complicated theoretical framework that goes with this. The consultants, they didn't like it because it was too complicated. So I simplified it down to be able to use it in teaching, because otherwise it's of no use if you can't use it. So what you see in the workplace is you see people with their point of view, and when you look at this from an OD and cultural perspective, oh yeah, you know, it's rubbish working here, it's always been like this, nothing's ever going to change. No, that's the resulting point of view. If it's said enough times, then you know it's a habit of mind, which is the next one up. And then you've got to understand what is the frame of reference, so the assumptions and expectations that people have in their heads of themselves and other people that's causing them to do that. And when we look at reflective practice, we look at the three elements of the cognitive, the affective, and the cognitive. So when we're getting people to reflect on self, it's the cognitive, what's inside, you know, the thinking, and outside of your cognition now. The affective, the feeling, emotional side, and then the cognitive, what's the drive? What's the drive for you to continue with this? And of course, it's driven by the values, beliefs, and assumptions, which is strongly defended. So people will strongly defend their assumptions by using their heuristics and biases to come up with an argument to tell you why they're right and you're wrong. Does that sound familiar to anybody at all? I can't see if anybody's got their hand up because I'm on presenter mode. If anybody does, shout up. So what we were getting reported back was the behaviours in the workplace. And of course, what this creates is it creates the state of anxiety along with the state of curiosity. And this is some work by Catherine Taylor and Marino, whom I've had the fortune to meet and actually do some work with. And at work, when they get in a situation where the anxiety is caused by the constant pressure on them, interaction with teams, the interprofessional working, especially in the nuclear engineering sector, we found that meetings become an opportunity for conflict rather than an opportunity to resolve conflict. So we kind of work with them and how we can calm that down. We actually explain to them why this is happening, and we look at the five senses, or the sixth sense, if you believe in intuition or whatever you want to call that, and how that works in the workplace. But this is what stops people from learning, is that state of anxiety. And we were seeing that in teams in the workplace, teams were placing other people into states of anxiety through their behavior. And this, for me, you know, shouldn't be happening. It's an issue. So what we did was we looked at how we can develop deeper reflective practice. So we look at simple reflection, we look at critical reflection, we look at reflexivity, and we look at understanding what we call epistemic cognition. So it's understanding what they don't know and what they can know about themselves. And we do that through storytelling using an artifact. And this is the bit on the second day where we don't want to start at this point, we want to finish at this point in the teaching. So we allow them to paint, draw, sculpt, use poetry, bake, whatever they want to do to tell a story. And this allows them to kind of reach the inner self while they are trying to work out what their story is and the who, if you will. So I'm just going to stop the presentation there. Is anybody familiar with bilateral stimulation? Yeah, anybody familiar with it? No? Okay, anybody when they've got an issue goes for a run and tries to think the issue through. So the running and the thinking, that's bilateral stimulation. So you come back with an answer to the problem. Okay. So what we do is we use the creation of the artifact for them to go away and reflect on the self to create the bilateral stimulation in terms of understanding who they are and their own learner journey and their journey to where they are today. And that's what the artifacts, what the artifact creation does. They then get an opportunity to have group tutorials in between the 6 weeks between finishing that and coming back in 6 weeks' time to present, to peer present to each other their 10-minute presentation. No PowerPoint allowed. So it's got to be an artifact that has to be created through something that they use their hands for or whatever they want to do. This is where we start to see the shift, in massive shift in thinking. And what we're doing is I'm applying Mesereau's work. His work starts off with 10 stages of change in terms of transformation. The first point being having a disorientating dilemma. Now, what he's talking about a problem for which you do not have an answer. And his work in the 1960s and 70s with Victoria Marsick looked at women returning to teaching. This is where his actual observation started. And because culturally women hadn't been allowed at that point to become teachers formally, they suddenly were allowed to. So all of these women that had lots of experience and had worked in schools and were able to teach needed a certificate to do that. So they came to Columbia University and they came into the classrooms, large groups of them, and they sat there. And what he observed was them sitting there going, oh, I shouldn't be here. I'm not as good as that Joanna Smith. She's much better than I am because she keeps asking intelligent questions. Wish I thought of that question. No, I shouldn't be here. And then socially and culturally, they went through the assumptions and their realities in the mind as to all of the things that were pressurizing them not to be in that classroom on that day and not to learn. And this was the start of his research. He was particularly interested in why aren't they learning? Not what they're learning, but why aren't they learning? When he was viewing capable, competent people who were clearly able to do the job, what is it that was psychologically stopping them from learning? So Mesereau's theory starts with a disorientating dilemma, a problem for which you do not have a solution. So what we do is we artificially create a disorientating dilemma in the classroom for them by asking them to do the painting, drawing, and they're like, oh, I can't do this. I cannot do this. I'm no good at painting. I'm no good at drawing. And I'm going to show you some examples of people that aren't very good at painting and drawing in a minute, but who are amazing. And we use these group coaching sessions over the next 6 weeks, one a week, to provide psychological safety and a handrail while we take them through the process. Fiona.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself, could I, Ian? This is where I'm going to come in and say it. So,
questions.
I think it's really interesting what you're saying about the work watching the women in learning to become teachers, you know, back in the 60s, whatever it was, because actually when you look at what we're doing now with integration, and that's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing professional groups in meetings together, unable to speak up, thinking I'm not as good as that profession. So the whole parity of esteem between professions, which we don't have, the whole lack of self-belief, because actually I'm not surrounded by my peers who make me feel better about myself. That is exactly what we're seeing, and we're expecting these groups of professions to suddenly integrate and change patient care. Interesting, isn't it?
Well, I can share Sue Pope's exact quote because you're going to see her reflection in a minute, but she didn't put the exact quote in because it would have been offensive when she delivered this to the defence thing in September. But her actual quote was, I've hated medics for 22 years with a vengeance. Then she's a lead AHP. And she said, I've allowed that to now disappear because she said, I can put myself in the position of the medic and I can understand where they're coming from. And she said, I've wasted 22 years of my life hating them. That was her phrase. And she's like, yeah, but you don't know that until you know that. And it's easy to say that, but interprofessionally, this is what we were seeing within defence, and this is the reason why we started it. because
Yeah.
and the first thing we did was we took away all the insignia. So we took away all uniforms. No uniforms were allowed in any of the teaching. So, you know, the full colonel who was in charge of the COVID response for the military was sat next to a corporal who actually delivers healthcare assistant, and she's equally come on as far as the colonel has, if not more. So from a professional identity perspective, we put them all on a level playing field, and then the badges, you know, your OD, the customs, this is how we do things around here, because you get a badge that says doctor, you know, whatever it might be. There's the significance that goes behind that becomes a blocker to being able to speak and communicate with each other. I know the work you did, Fiona, which is really important, and we pick up a little bit of that critical professionalism. What does it mean to be a critical professional? And of course, for you, Fiona, what's important here is where your professional capital comes into this. So in terms of being a critical professional, how easy is it to lose your professional capital? How hard is it to earn your professional capital in the organisation? So if your behaviours don't equal what you say you're going to do, you lose your professional capital very quickly, and it's quite hard to earn it. Thank you for that.
Isn't it?
It is. It was fascinating when we did this with defence, and the interesting part is when we did it with the NHS, we did it with defence, we did it with Sellafield. We had highly articulate, intelligent people who couldn't communicate. All three were similar. And all three thought they were different for different reasons, but actually they're all very much the same. And actually, once they got it, they're amazing people, absolutely amazing people with the skill set and the knowledge that we need across the board, but they just don't know how to get it out. Right. So that's the wrong PowerPoint. Let's get the right PowerPoint. Where's it gone? Sorry about this. I'm just going to try and get it to work. Make sure I'm on the right page. So what I'm now going to show you is some of the results of where we got to. Can you all see that as a full page? Can everybody see that? Yeah.
Yeah, we've got it.
Got it. Okay. So this was when we undertook the work with Forth Valley. This was the first, one of the first artifacts that got created by a physio, and we published that in, is it 2020? I think I can't see the date on the thing because there's something in front of it. And we were fascinated by the way in which people approach this. And what she basically said is that it takes many hands interprofessionally, she was talking about, to actually heal somebody. And this was her interpretation of her learner journey, and putting herself through this program and what she'd learned from it. This is one of the most recent, not the coffee and tea making facilities in the background, but what you'll see on the table, these are some of the artifacts that were created by the various people from defence. And if you look bottom right, you can see an eye and you can see a set of para wings. And this was a person that couldn't draw and hadn't drawn since they were 14 years old, apparently. And this particular person's observation and reflection was on when they started to work with the Northern Air Ambulance, that they were ex-parachute regiment and special forces doctor, ED doctor, went in to support the Northern Air Ambulance, and went in thinking that their previous experience of leadership, which was parachute regiment and special forces, was just do as I say and let's get on with it now, pretty much. He tried to apply it in practice and it didn't work. And he went into one of the stations and kind of tried to change the rota without consultation, and it ended very, very badly. And it was through his reflection on that he started to understand himself. And if you look at it just above it, you can see an NHS label here. And that is a storybook that one of the consultant surgeons wrote. And it's a story about Mr. Me. And Mr. Me is him. And because he's a consultant Reserve Armed Forces, he works in a hospital in London. And it was his story of sharing his own experience of whistleblowing bad practice. And it was striking, absolutely striking. So these are some of the artifacts that got created or that get created as a result of the artifact creation. Now, the formal evaluation from Defence Medical Leadership Programme, here's some of it here. So these are just some of the questions that I picked out. So as you can see, because we're interested in critical reflection of self, we're looking at developing a reflexive practice, being aware of their own epistemic cognition. So to be able to get 5 of them to understand that was amazing in terms of that. The other was other forms of reflection that we hadn't thought of that they came up with. What have the workplace benefits been to others in terms of your leadership? Because this is very much constructed on self, and then team, and then organisation, and then how do you take it back in to actually have an impact? And we are measuring that impact currently. So these were some of the comments that we had from the participants from the first cohort. And of course, we're very much interested in their interaction with the colleagues. Pardon me, the DS means directing staff in the second paragraph. So in other words, they were always coming up with the solution for others rather than allowing people around them to be empowered through the power of coaching and mentoring to actually undertake that, which again was interesting. Have you been able to develop and refine your practice, the leadership behaviours needed by defence? Yes, they have. And you're going to see that in a second when I share Sue's experience, Sue Pope's experience. And what we're doing at the moment is Sue developed a mini programme off the back of this. And then we helped to deliver that to the first little cohort. And we're just doing the evaluation at the moment and writing it up for publication at the moment. So this is Lieutenant Colonel Sue Pope. She's the lead AHP for Defence, and this is what she said. It had given her permission. So it was permission to be herself. That was the first thing. It's given her perspective on herself and on other people as well. So she's able to look at herself and then also understand others. So that was her with the quote about the doctor. And also it's given her confidence. That's the key. It's given her a platform to move forward. And I'm going to show you the how now, how she's done it. So what was fascinating was that when we were about to give the presentation to Defence back in September, I hadn't seen this and she hadn't seen my circular theoretical model. And we sat down just before the publication, before we put the presentation together. And because mine was an earlier slide, she looked at my slide with the circle in it and all the things in it. And she said to me, "You've just copied my slide." I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah, you've copied my slide." I said, "All right, okay." And then we carried on through and we got to this. And then I could see why she thought that, because what's pulled through here from her learning are the things that are the disruptive pedagogical approach to the delivery. And then I explained to her that I'd stolen her work and published it 6 years ago. So 6 years ago, that original slide was published and she'd not seen it. But it gave me confidence to realize that the teaching was having an impact because it was pulling through. So what she was experiencing were the things that I was trying to get through. So this is Mesereau's 10 stages, the disorientating dilemma, a self-examination, the critical assessment of assumptions of self and other, recognition that the experience of their own learning has been shared by others and other people have done it. The exploration is kind of looking into self, planning the course of action, acquisition of new knowledge, provisional trying of roles. So if they're going to shift from one state to another, then they're going to need to try it, test it, and see where they're up to. Building of confidence and self-confidence, and then a reintegration back in. And then these were the key parts that she identified. Perspective positioning, we use some exercises where we get them to sit in the perspective of the other person that they're trying to seek to understand. Identities in there, Fiona, big part of it. Critical reflection and reflexivity, peer review, mentoring support, sharing meaning through storytelling. Now, a big part of that is creating professional groups as well, communities of professional practice. And that's one of the things that we've done. So within each group, you split them down into smaller communities of professional practice, but the whole of the first cohort became one big one, and it's still working together for each other. So these are the bits that she took out of it and decided to take from what we'd done with her, and then she dropped them into defence and ran a pilot to see what it looked like. And the community of leadership practice is what we are starting to develop now within Defence Medical Services. And the key elements that came out of it were very much the same as the key elements that came out of ours. These are the things that she included in it. And then this is the key part. She's kind of highlighted here, the key stage is that key stage there between 2 and 5. And that's where we spend most of our time, is actually working with them on that part. And the 2 bits that are, as you can see, are circled are the ones that had the biggest impact. Artifact creation should actually be in that circle as well, because we've got the what, so what, and then the what next part, because we've got to send them off on the way. Now, what Sean and I did, Sean works for Ernst & Young. We kind of shared our experiences because he teaches into the US Marine Corps as well. And we looked at what it is that we do. This is the how do we train the trainer? And it starts with the reflection plus. So that's all of the forms of reflection. That's transformative action learning sets. That's reflection through to reflexivity. That's coaching as well, comes into that, which creates the discourse, which enables the start of the perspective taking and the perspective positioning. And of course, there's got to be motivation behind this, motivation for change. And then we understand what that looks like. And then there's the epistemology, you know, where do they want to get to and where do they want to get to? And there's the evaluation. The most important part is the evaluation and the impact on self and the impact on others. So we created a questionnaire which sits with the transformative learning theory, and it identifies which parts of the learning have enabled them to actually have an impact on the self, the organisation, and others. So that's where we're up to at the moment with our research. Sorry, let me just get rid of this. Apologies. Got this great big PowerPoint in front of me. I can't see anything there. Has it come off presenting? Can you see me again?
Yeah, we can see you, Ian.
Okay. So where we're up to at the moment is that we are developing the theory more, or extending the theory and granulating it down so that we can share it with other people. At the moment, we are delivering this, as I say, into defence. We're delivering it into the nuclear engineering sector as well. And we've just been approached by the Cabinet Office through my links with the military to speak to them and also to Shrivenham. So there's been quite a lot of interest in this. We've got quite a lot in the calendar for next year. I'm giving a presentation at Certain Medical Brigades conference in February with Professor Van Tam. So there's 4 of us been selected, and I'm absolutely excited to meet him and be able to present with him on different types of leadership from different perspectives that have an impact. We've measured this now, probably over 2,000 participants over the past 10 years plus. So we've quite a lot of data that's sitting there, and that data currently with Defence has been analysed. We're undertaking a 2-year longitudinal study now with Defence to look at those that have finished the first cohort and where they go over the next 2 years with it. And you know, what's the impact? How does it continue to be an impact? And then we're picking that up with cohorts 2 and 3 as well, and the future cohorts that we're going down. So It is different. It creates a bit of fear when there's no leadership theory in there. It creates a bit of theory when there's not lots and lots of PowerPoints as well, because we want to see lots and lots of PowerPoints. It's not lots of PowerPoints, it's not good learning. And it's just great to see the shift in perspective and the shift and change in the people when they come towards the end of the program. So over to you guys for questions. I can't see. I think you've all got your cameras off, so I can only see Karen. I can see you. Oh, hang on. Here we go. Karen.
Yeah, so I'm really interested to hear from, well, all of you, and obviously I don't know all of you very well, but I think I know most of you, but certainly those of us that have been involved with, let's say, traditional leadership development, so like Nick and Sophie and Amanda and, well, all of you really, you know, and, you know, Angela and Claire from an HR perspective. There is real potential here for us to pilot this. And that's part of why obviously we've introduced this today. And so I'm just really interested to hear from others. What do you think? You know our people, that work in health and care. How do you think this might go down? You know, how do you think it might land?
Nick, I think you've got your hand up first, I think.
In answer to your question, Karen, I think if it's couched in the right terms, it could land really well. I think there is an appetite for change out there at the moment. You know, there's so much change going on around people. I think there's a lot of leadership and improvement stuff going on for people who are currently maybe a little bit under too much pressure to be able to do anything with it. And I think looking more at helping people, you know, understand themselves, and as Ian was saying around how that drives their behaviours, that could really be a unique selling point. To be honest, it's something there that actually, you know, these are people who have been on 100 leadership courses, who have done the mandatory stuff, you know, and actually something like this could really help them.
And Nick, just to share with you, that was the same response from the military. They've been on lots of military courses. And I sat at graduation 3 weeks ago, and Pride is the lead for mental health for defence. And he's obviously a mental health specialist. And on the first few days, I wasn't sure whether he was not getting it, not sure about it, actually didn't agree with it, or any of these things. And I kind of said to him, I knew he'd done something with it, but I didn't quite know what he'd done. And I said to him, 2 questions, Pride. This was at lunchtime. What's it done for you personally? And what's it done for the impact of your work and the team? And he said, number one, it's allowed me to understand and be me, which was a bit of a surprise coming from, you know, a mental health specialist. I'm like, wow. And he said, the second thing is, we didn't really understand your transformative learning model. I didn't understand it in the first module. It grew on me. So he said, I decided we'd take it apart with the team. We had an hour's discussion on it, and we decided we got it, but we've now implemented it with the clients. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, right, that's clear then. Thank you, Pride. Sophie, you've had your hand up next, I think.
Ian, that was really interesting, and I was just thinking it's not necessarily that we need to launch something new, including all of this, that actually this could really help us improve what we already deliver. And how we deliver, I think, is the key. So we've recently at NCIC started delivering a new leadership programme that's quite experiential, and some of the things and the way that we do it is very different to the type of learning that people have done before. And what really resonated with me was when you talked about the neurosequencing and how it can trigger fear in people, and almost they want to run away from it, they want to reject it, they want to say, oh, this doesn't work, it's no good, kind of thing, because actually it's triggered fear in them because it's something completely different to how they do it before. But what we're doing is giving them the space and the time to get used to it over kind of a 4 or 5 module period. So by the end of it, they are then going, oh, actually, yeah, this is a different way of going, and this has worked, and this has resonated with me, and this has triggered with me, and things like that. So the people that are kind of saying, oh, it's going too slow at the beginning, by the end are understanding and appreciating why we kind of set the tone and we set the scene at the beginning and took that time, because actually it's about understanding how each other, who each other are, where their beliefs and where their importance is, and their experiences come in, what's important to them, who they are, and how that then feeds into what they're doing for the rest of the programme, and really building up that rapport with the learners and that psychologically safe space, as it were. So that's a completely different way of doing programmes to what we're used to, and we've had that feedback from the delegates, and it's really landing very well. And I think it's something that we're trying to pick up now with the other things that we're delivering, to almost make people that little bit uncomfortable, because it's a different way of learning, because actually then the impact for them is greater.
Yeah, absolutely. They get pushed hard on this program, and basically what I'm asking them is, why do you believe that to be true, and where's the evidence? But without saying it, because you're pushing them to that point, epistemically understanding what they don't know, because they're comfortable with what they think they know, because that's the other point, what they think they know, and then they are distinctly uncomfortable once they realise their behaviours may not be what they perceive them to be. So when you take the perception versus the reality, which is what we do with the exercises, very subtly, that's when it becomes very uncomfortable, because then they realise, oh my God, because a lot of the comments are, I wish I'd known this 20 years ago. Hey, wish I'd known this 20 years ago, But what I did was, rather than use, I think this is a good idea, I created the theoretical framework behind it. And when I looked at Mesereau's work, it fitted, but then he unpicked his theoretical framework. So I spent an extra year on my PhD looking at neuroscience and how the brain works, and just to understand his theory and where he come from at that point in time. What had he built his theory on, and did it have validity? And then how do you apply it in practice? Because it wasn't getting applied in practice systematically and safely. And how are you able to measure it? Because that's the other thing. You've got to be able to measure it at the end of the day, to say somebody came in at X and they've gone out at Y. And we're currently at a stage at the moment where we're developing a model with a lady from San Jose University that measures individual transformational change in self. And we're just at the beta testing stage with that. So all of this fits together because you've got to be able to measure it. And we'll go about measurement, and the program's not about measurement, and there's no leadership theory in it. At the end of the day, you've got to make sure that they're in a different place. Otherwise, you've wasted their time and you've wasted your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that was a big focus for us on this program, is actually understand where are they at when they're starting, and where are they feeling like they finished at the end, because it's around leadership, it's around their own self-awareness and their own abilities to lead. So at the end of the day, like you said earlier on, it's about how they feel. It's not about how we're necessarily perceiving where they've come from A to B, or even where the managers are perceiving, although obviously that's helpful intelligence as well, because it's what others have viewed, but it's how they're feeling and where their confidence has grown and where they've landed, because actually if they feel it's made a difference, that's going to obviously be what impacts for them going out there. Whether or not they can remember this model does this and that model does that, everyone picks up on different things and obviously resonates differently with different things, but the fact that they've gone away thinking, actually I can do this and I've got more confidence to do this, is great.
But we don't expect them to go away with lots of models, because it's about them. And there's that 5-stage model that I've developed, which is the simple one. Values, beliefs, behaviours. How's it? What do others see in you, and what impacts it have on your team? And that's the crux of it. That's it. And observing that from different perspectives. The perspective positioning part is the addition to the theory. According to Victoria Marsick, who was a researcher with Mesereau in the first place, and she's been instrumental in guiding me with this. It's her that put Sean and I together, because he's doing something similar to me in America, but we both studied under Victoria Marsick, so we both kind of got the foundations of Mesereau's work, because she worked with him, and then she put us together to say, right, you two need to get together because you can share your understanding of what you're both doing on different sides of the water, if you will. Jill, sorry.
I think you mean Amanda.
Amanda.
Sorry. Sorry. Yeah, no,
yeah,
just really, I think it's brilliant, actually. It's great because, like you say, we do a lot of sharing leadership theories, but this will really help people put that into practice and interpret it for themselves. And I think it's great the way that you completely change the delivery style as well, because, like I said, people will turn up and expect to see a PowerPoint. They'll expect to be told what to do, and they'll just sit and write. But that fact of getting them to actively reflect on themselves and to share themselves on that more personal level as well, and their own journeys, I think is brilliant, because quite often what we do is we separate our professional selves from our personal self, and I think that helps that sort of causes a bit of a disconnect in our behaviours and values as well. And it's really brilliant to kind of pull those together, and that helps people understand and reflect more on their work in practice. So hopefully all those models that we've been talking about for so long, it will help them implement them when they get back into the workplace. So I think it's an excellent way of delivering something totally different and helping move it into practice.
Well, on the first one as well, just to show some of the behaviours, and this was exactly how the conversation went, and I don't think people understand what they might look like to others. So I was sat at the very back of the classroom while my colleague John sorted out the big screen to get the brigadier on because he had COVID, and this lady turned a chair around to me, and her only question, she didn't say who she was, hello, nothing. All she said to me was, "Where's the PowerPoint?" That's all she said to me. And I'm like, "Oh, hello. And I said, "John's got it at the front." And she looked at me and didn't say anything else, or that these are the exact words she came out with. "It's not on Blackboard." That was a statement. And I said, "You're right, it's not on Blackboard." And then she said, "Why is it not on Blackboard?" And I said, "Because I haven't put it on Blackboard." So she said, "Well, why isn't it on Blackboard?" I said, "Because I didn't want to put it on Blackboard." "Well, I need it." I said, "I know." I said, "Tell me why you need it." "Well, I need to write. I need it in front of me so I can stare at it and I can write against it." I said, "I know that. And that's why it's not on Blackboard." "Well, what am I going to do?" I said, "What do you mean, what are you going to do?" "Well, what am I going to do? I don't know what to do now." I said, "Pen and a piece of paper, just an idea." Not happy. Turn the chair around. Not happy. And she did the first module and then decided she didn't need to do any more because she knew it all. And the brigadier was bouncing because he said, "I wish I hadn't wasted a place on it." But her attitude, you could, she exhumed hubris. You could feel you could feel it coming off her, kind of thing. And she's like, "I'm here to tell you how to do this leadership stuff. I've done all that shit before. I don't need any of this." No problem. Joanna.
Hi, thank you. And I think that's just so indicative of taking somebody out of their comfort zone and stripping it back and getting them to connect with themselves. I mean, some of the stuff I've thought of here is this feels like it's a springboard to anything else, because once you've got that self-awareness and you connect with your own, for me, I've written down things like find yourself. And from a health and well-being perspective, for me, this is where the marriage starts to happen, because it is that little bit of mindfulness. It's that inner talking to yourself. It might be about stress and anxiety, but in this instance, we're talking about abilities and skills. So it's the same, different topic, but a different conversation you're having with yourself. And I think you've just triggered me to think of things like 360s, MBTIs, Johari window stuff. Does that lead us to start to believe other things because it's in a report or it's on a spider graph? So again, interesting to take all that away and challenge people to sit in silence and really focus on themselves. Yep. I'm going to try some of this, Ian. I am a Swartz round facilitator, so I will do it in a safe way. But I think it's a real breakthrough, different approach to try.
And each of these things is just a prompt. So it can be a prompt that you're using just to give them a little gentle poke with things. So what you're talking about there is the id, super id, and ego. And this is the thing, because actually with Susie, who works at San Jose, she actually researched for a PhD what transforms. Now, one of the things that transforms is the ego. So we looked at ego transformation and what is it within the ego that transforms and is required to be worked with. And it is very much about the ego. And all of the, all of these things around them. And MBTI is another one that you can utilize with them to say, okay, you know how to do your own MBTI type really, really well because you do it every day. And they go, I've done MBTI, but you say, okay, look at the opposite and then sit within the opposite and work out what it feels like to be opposite, because you will work with people that are opposite and different to you, and they will find it really uncomfortable. And you won't always necessarily recognize that they're uncomfortable, but they will sit there being uncomfortable. How do you understand the perspective of the other? How can you put yourself in that perspective? How can you take that perspective? That's what it's about. Claire.
Hi, thank you for the PowerPoint presentation. That isn't a PowerPoint presentation, but basically, I just wanted to say that I do deliver training for attendance management, and I know that some people attend our presentation, our sessions, to tick a box as part of their CPD to do their professional registration. It absolutely is that, and they don't participate. I mean, I call people out, so when they're not on camera, one of the things I say is, what do you think about that? Angela Jeffries, for example, just because she's there and she's not on camera. But basically, she then, the manager that I spoke to on this training session, she didn't answer because she wasn't even there. So this type of training will appeal to people, the people that we work with, the end users for attendance management, for example. They are very much at the front line of the job that they do. They're very pragmatic in what they do to save patients and deal with patient care. But when it comes to classroom environment, it's foreign to them. It absolutely is difficult for them to comprehend. So actually, by doing it this way and taking it out of the classroom theory and the old school style that even classrooms don't use in schools now, it's just absolutely, it shouldn't be new, but it's just devastating that we're having this conversation right now to say this is how we deliver training now.
Well, the first thing we did was we took all of the value stuff out, the NHS values and that, because it's far too complicated. So when we worked, so what we did was we picked the military, we picked the army values, the 6 simple values, and it's all about it's all about integrity. It's all about supporting others. The 6 simple words. So we replaced all of that stuff, because the other thing we found, especially with nuclear engineers, was that a vision and a mission had been created for them, which meant that they hadn't participated in that, therefore they couldn't believe it because they weren't part of it. So therefore it was being done to them. So when you look at the vision and the mission, you say to them, what's that? And they get excited and start telling you all about it. And of course, at the end of the day, it's just a series of words on a flat piece of paper on a wall. So how do you translate that vision, that mission, into behaviors every day and repeat it over and over again? Because that's the key part. It's about how you behave that is the culture from an OD perspective. And they talk about the culture, and it was like, oh, well, they go like that and say them above, and you go, no, you are them, not somebody else above you. You form that culture by allowing those behaviors to continue. So moral courage is one of the values of the military. Where do you have the moral courage to call out that behavior in a positive way at the appropriate time?
So in another role that I have, as chair of governors, we did that whole values, what are our values in school, and basically we got everybody involved. So the children were involved themselves, the parents, the teaching staff, all the governors, we all worked together, and it wasn't just about sharing ideas, it was about actually working together. What does our school mean, and why is it different to any other school? And actually by doing that, we've had inspectors coming through and checking with us and saying, well, actually they get it, they've got it, because we're working differently. Yet when we're delivering training here in the workplace, we just don't embrace that, because it's very much tick a box, attend the training, and actually maybe don't even take anything away, just other than the certificate that you've taken part.
And for me, when I started doing the research, it was working with CPFT, as Karen knows, right at the very beginning, like 8-9 years ago, and it was working. What I was starting to do, the why was it working, which sent me down the theoretical framework development, because I had to be able to explain this to myself first, because I was interested, and then if I was to utilize it and have some impact, it's got to be useful, it's got to have utility. There's no point in creating theory for the sake of creating theory, or publishing stuff for the point of it. I'm not into that. It's got to be applied. So it was like, how do I understand what I've just done and how I've just done it? Karen, you've patiently been sitting there with your hand up.
I know I forget what the first thing I was going to say. This is probably something different now, but never mind. Yeah, I mean, so many things I'm still thinking about, and I suppose thinking about my own practice and my own approach. And anyone that's been on any of my programs will know that my mantra is everything you say and everything you do makes a difference, whether you like it or not. And so it's really important to me to role model out, trying to get that psychological safety. And as a result of that, everybody knows everything there is to know about me, because I share absolutely everything, so rightly or wrongly. So, that authentic leadership, facilitation, delivery is really important. And we know that there's evidence to support that, that authentic leadership is important and all those sorts of things. But then afterwards, I was thinking, there is so much data out there that backs up that people actually want this, but we just need to connect the two together. So if I think of NCIC, I'm not speaking out of turn, because the staff survey results are public, around engagement, around leadership, around behaviours. That's the same in the Cumbria arm of CNTW. I don't need to see Cumbria County Council to know with what's coming now, behaviour is going to be everything. I can't account for Lancs and South Cumbria, but people are saying, well, behaviour is everything. When people respond, when people do free text, take the trouble to do free text comment in staff surveys, they talk about behaviour. They don't talk about skills mostly, do they? Or, the technical side of it, they talk about behaviour. So we know it's the real stuff and the right stuff. But like you say, we can't jump straight to shock and awe. So we've got to try and weave it in and position it in a way that people are comfortable with it. So, but it is the right stuff in my view, definitely.
And what we tend to do is we do the share in the morning on the first day, which they don't realise is actually having a bigger impact than they think. And then we'll take them into values and beliefs, which is the important part. And then we'll show them something they've seen before. So I'll use a theory they'll have seen, and it's well known, like TA analysis, something like that. So suddenly they can grasp and hook back onto something that makes it, oh, that's okay. This isn't quite as kind of scary as I thought. Because the disruptive pedagogical model you see, they don't see any of that, of course, because this is what's happening. It's what's happening in the room is what's happening in the room. I do show them that blue one with the 3 things on, because your behaviour is driven by habit and mind. Is driven by a frame of reference. Why? Why is it that you do that every time this happens? Why is it that's your response to this? Because that's the key part, is very slowly over the period, working with them to understand the why. Why do I do that? Well, why do we even do that? Why do we act like that? That's what Sue Pope said. She's about the doctors. She said, oh my God, I've wasted 20 years of my life hating doctors. She said, because we never seemed in a hierarchy, because there's a hierarchy, to be high enough up the hierarchy to be respected. And of course, some of that was due to behaviours. Some of that was assumptions she was making. And guess what? She's now working with the chief scientist for defence, who's a doctor, and they're coaching each other and doing the coaching support in practice with the staff. I'm like, wow, you two wouldn't have spoken to each other, before this. It's like, wow. For me, that impact going through has just been phenomenal, which is why in January we're sitting down with a whiteboard pen to start to capture some of the stories before we apply for ModRec, which is the MOD research permissions, to start the research probably at Easter next year. And we've done evaluation. We're going to follow through the research with thorough interviews. But I've spoken to each of the students in turn and taken a few notes. And even some of them gobsmacked me completely, where I thought, we have the lady that's in charge of the #1 dog section for the military, the veterinary, she's a vet. She invited John down, the guy that helps me, to talk to to do what they call a fireside chat in the military, and he thought it was going to be a gentle little chat. 68 of them turned up in this room. And he was like, right, she's now shared her experience of transformation. John, we want to pick your brains. He said, I was knackered by the time I got to the end of the evening. Fireside chat was a bonfire, he said. But they were fascinated because they saw the change in her. And again, with defence, because we're picking people at different levels of the organisation, the head of defence science is now saying, you've sent 3 of my people have now been out of 40, and I'm seeing a change in the way in which we work. Because one of her, she called them a subordinate, it's the word she used, came along. And when I was trying to be helpful by giving them a little bit more Mesereau theory, and this is the second cohort, they decided that was far too much. I was real heretic then, and they kicked off, which is normal. So I used the example of them kicking off at me not understanding what I was trying to say with the theory I was using to explain what was happening. And it was her deputy, Dan, who went, he's a scientist. This is just complete crap, Ian. You've given me these 10 epistemic questions, which are really simple questions like, when you were given the instruction to do something, was a person of authority involved? Yes. So the assumption is they know better than you. Yes, there's a hierarchy, but they may be wrong in this situation. So why aren't we questioning? Why don't we question? Not in a negative way, but in a positive way. So I came back and I started to work through it, and he sat there, and eventually after the 3rd question he went, hang on, I'm getting this. And he went, I've got this, that's clever. And he started to explain it. I then withdrew myself to the back of the class. He started to teach the class. So it's like, right, I've got what Ian's saying now. And he turned around and he's like, that question equals this and this, and they worked it out. And that's the key part about how do we do it? It's taking yourself out of the equation and letting them go on with it, because they peer learn. And you're there to facilitate it, to ensure they get the best out of the experience. It's taken 10 years to get to this stage.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ian. Absolutely fascinating. I think you've definitely really inspired us to think, differently about how we approach OD and L&D interventions going forward. So that's great. Thank you.